So imagine you're standing on the edge of a river and you're just watching this massive century-old suspension bridge.
Oh yeah, like one of those structures that just feels completely permanent.
Exactly. It has carried thousands of cars every single day for decades. And then on a sunny, perfectly calm Tuesday afternoon, with literally no warning whatsoever, the entire thing groans, snaps, and just collapses into the water.
Wow.
Right. And your immediate reaction, and well, the reaction of every news anchor covering the disaster, is to ask, what just happened today to cause this?
Like what was the sudden storm or the earthquake?
Right. But any structural engineer looking at the wreckage is going to tell you a very different story. They'll tell you the bridge didn't actually fail on that sunny Tuesday.
It failed what, like 10 years earlier?
Yep. Deep inside the concrete pillars were these microscopic fractures in the rebar just allowed rust to quietly eat away at the core strength of the steel.
Wow, yeah. The invisible rot.
Exactly. We love to blame the sudden collapse, the unexpected crisis or the catastrophic storm. But the truth is, the rot is almost always there long before the roof actually caves in.
It really is.
So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are thrilled you're joining us because today we are doing a complete structural autopsy on how things fall apart and, honestly, more importantly, how they are rebuilt.
I'm really looking forward to this one.
Yeah, we are examining an ancient text, specifically Isaiah chapter 19, which is traditionally known as an oracle concerning Egypt.
But we aren't just looking at this as some dusty historical relic.
No, not at all. We are unpacking it as a surprisingly modern, incredibly accurate blueprint for the life cycle of systemic failure and radical restoration.
And it is a remarkable text to look at through a modern lens, primarily because human nature just hasn't changed.
Right.
When we talk about Egypt in the ancient world, we really have to understand that we aren't just talking about a location on a map.
They were the powerhouse.
Exactly. Egypt was the gold standard of stability. I mean, the Nile River was arguably the most predictable, reliable agricultural engine in the entire ancient Near East.
So it felt untouchable.
Completely. For an ancient reader, predicting the collapse of Egypt was like predicting the sudden catastrophic failure of the global banking system today.
Oh, wow. The ultimate too big to fail institution.
Right. And what this text provides is this step-by-step psychological and structural breakdown of how an impenetrable system actually dies.
Okay, so what's the progression?
Well, it tracks a very specific cycle. It starts with internal polarization, which leads to the collapse of external resources, and that prompts a frantic reliance on false experts.
Oh, I can already see the modern parallels.
Right, which then forces a period of extreme, humbling pressure and finally concludes with a type of restoration that is completely unthinkable to the people inside the crisis.
Okay, so to understand how we ever get to that restoration, we really have to start where the text starts, which is the invisible rot.
The microfractures in the steel.
Exactly. The narrative in Isaiah 19 opens with this really dramatic image god riding a swift cloud into Egypt, causing the idols to tremble. But the very first practical, tangible sign of collapse isn't a foreign army marching across the border.
It's not an external threat at all.
No, it says, I will set the Egyptians against the Egyptians, and they shall fight everyone against his brother, and everyone against his neighbor, city against city, and kingdom against kingdom.
So the initial failure is entirely internal.
Completely. Which totally upends how we usually diagnose failure, doesn't it?
What's fascinating here is that most organizations or families or even nations, they spend the vast majority of their energy guarding the perimeter against outside threats.
Right. Building walls, setting up defenses.
Exactly. But this text argues that external threats only succeed after the internal alignment has already fractured. I mean, a society or an organization is fundamentally a high-trust cooperative engine.
A high-trust engine. I like that.
Yeah, and when polarization takes over, when brother fights brother and department fights department, that trust just evaporates.
People start siloing information, probably.
Yes, they stop covering for each other's blind spots. The collective energy of the system is entirely consumed by internal friction rather than productive output.
Okay, let's unpack this because the text gets incredibly granular about what happens next. Once that social friction sets in, the external systems start crashing.
The rivers dry up.
Right. It says the waters of the river will dry up, the paper reeds by the brooks will wither and blow away, the fishers will mourn, and the flax workers and weavers will be completely confounded.
Total economic standstill.
Yeah, and I always used to read that and think it was just, a laundry list of bad weather and bad luck.
Just a natural disaster.
Exactly. But connecting it to your point about trust, it makes total sense. Because if the fishermen hate the net makers and the weavers don't trust the farmers, the supply chain dies.
Right, the complex coordination required to maintain, say, the irrigation canals for the Nile, it simply stops happening.
So the river drying up isn't necessarily a climate disaster. It's a byproduct of a society that has lost the capacity to cooperate.
Taking that a step further, it really exposes the profound fragility of the external things we put our trust in.
What do you mean?
Well, we look at a thriving economy, or a massive corporate infrastructure,
Hmm?
or even just our own personal bank accounts, and we view them as permanent realities.
Like they're just facts of life.
But they are entirely contingent on human behavior and alignment. The moment that internal foundation cracks, those external systems can just evaporate with terrifying speed.
It totally reminds me of how, like, a massive app or a website crashes during a high traffic event. Millions of users get an error screen and everyone blames the servers.
They blame the external load.
Right. But when the developers actually do the postmortem, they almost always find that there was a single misaligned line of code, like a memory leak deep in the architecture, that had been sitting there for months.
It was fine when things were calm.
Yes, but under pressure, that internal rot brought down the entire multi-billion-dollar infrastructure.
It's exactly the same principle.
But here is the strange part of human psychology, right? When the app crashes, or when the ancient rivers dry up, people almost never want to look at the bad code or the internal hatred.
No. Now,
Why do we obsess over the symptom, the dry river, and completely ignore the internal division that caused the system to fail in the first place?
Because addressing the internal division requires ego death.
Ooh, ego death.
Yeah. I mean, if the river dries up, that is a tragedy, but hey, it's not my fault. I can be a victim of a dry river. I can complain about the weather.
Right, it's out of my hands.
But if the system is failing because I am in a bitter, toxic feud with my neighbor, or because our leadership team is driven by pride and territorialism fixing, that requires me to take responsibility.
It requires actual change, repentance, really.
Exactly. Confronting internal rot is deeply uncomfortable, so we desperately prefer to panic over the external circumstances.
We'd rather fight a visible enemy outside the gates than admit we're poisoning the well from the inside.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the next phase of this collapse, which is the fog of confusion.
Right, because when people refuse to fix the internal rot, but the external systems are rapidly failing, panic sets in. The text says the spirit of Egypt shall fail in the midst thereof.
And in their desperation, they start grasping at straws.
Yeah, they seek out idols, charmers, wizards, and mediums. They are terrified, the river is dry, and they just want someone, anyone, to give them a quick fix.
Fear destroys cognitive function.
It really does.
When stability vanishes, our brains prioritize immediate relief over long-term solutions. We lose our ability to discern the quality of the information we're receiving.
Which makes unstable environments a total breeding ground for bad guidance.
Exactly.
And the text is actually kind of hilarious in how it describes this. It aggressively mocks the so-called experts of the day.
Oh, it really does.
It says the princes of Zone are fools, and the council of Pharaoh's supposedly brilliant advisors has become brutish. It asks, where are thy wise men? Let them tell thee now.
Just calling them out entirely.
Yeah. These leaders are described as having a perverse spirit mingled among them, causing Egypt to err in every single action they take, staggering like a drunken man in his vomit.
It's a grotesque, highly vivid image of total institutional incompetence.
But this perfectly mirrors our modern behavior. Think about what happens today when the stock market dips or, a global crisis hits.
People lose their minds.
Millions of people immediately pull out their phones and start taking complex macroeconomic advice from a 22-year-old lifestyle influencer on TikTok.
Just because that person speaks with unearned confidence.
Yes. Why do we do that?
Well, that image of the staggering drunk is vital because it highlights a crucial failure of human logic. We confuse authority with clarity.
Say more about that.
In a stable paradigm, the princes of Zone might have been excellent administrators, but when the underlying system breaks, the old expertise becomes entirely useless.
Their algorithms are outputting garbage because the rules of the game have changed.
Right. Yet because they wear the badge of authority, people continue to follow them right off the cliff.
Wow.
The takeaway for you, listening to this, is to strictly evaluate the outcomes of your advisors, not their titles. If an expert is frantic, or if their advice constantly shifts, or if their primary strategy is just blaming another group.
They are staggering in the dark.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. I need to challenge this logic for a second.
Go for it.
If I am in that scenario, If my personal life is collapsing, my career is in jeopardy, or my community is falling apart, speed feels like survival.
Sure, panic sets the pace.
Right. If my house is literally on fire, I am going to grab the very first bucket of water I see. I don't have time to sit down, do a background check on the fire chief, and calmly evaluate my long-term structural alignment.
Fair point.
So how is slowing down to find wise counsel not just a recipe for burning to the ground while you philosophize?
Because you have to correctly identify the nature of the crisis. If your literal house is on fire, yes, grab a bucket. There's an acute, localized emergency. But what Isaiah 19 is describing is systemic collapse. If your house is collapsing because the foundation is built on quicksand, running around frantically pouring buckets of water on it, it won't save you.
Oh, it will just add weight and make you sink faster.
Exactly. In a systemic crisis, frantic action almost always accelerates the destruction. The staggering drunk offers you a bucket. Wise counsel tells you to step off the quicksand entirely.
Wow, that's a huge distinction.
Wise counsel understands that you cannot slap a superficial bandage on a structural failure.
Yeah.
You have to stabilize, stop making reactive choices, and prepare for a fundamental rebuild.
That distinction between an acute emergency and a structural failure is huge, and it explains why the quick fixes of these false experts ultimately fail.
They make it worse.
They really do. The text tells us that because they rely on these staggering drunks, the situation goes from bad to unimaginably worse. Egypt is given over into the hand of a cruel lord and a fierce king.
They hit absolute rock bottom.
Yes, they are filled with terror because of the shaking of the hand of God. Even the tiny land of Judah, which Egypt used to completely dominate, becomes a source of terror to them.
It's a total reversal of power.
It is. But right at that point of maximum pressure, the text introduces a massive pivot. It says they cry out to the Lord because of their oppressors, and God sends them a savior to deliver them.
The breaking point becomes the turning point.
Exactly. And it summarizes this entire agonizing process with a deeply jarring paradox. Verse 22 says, "The Lord shall smite and heal Egypt."
Smite and heal. It's a brilliant encapsulation of how genuine transformation occurs.
Yeah, because we tend to view smiting, the breakdown, the pressure, the loss of our resources, as the opposite of healing.
We view it as purely destructive.
Right. But in the context of a rotten foundation, the smiting is the prerequisite for the healing.
The intense pressure is the only mechanism powerful enough to shatter their reliance on the false experts and the fragile systems they worshipped.
So what does this all mean? Why is the smiting actually necessary? I understand the concept in nature, right? You think of a massive forest fire.
Oh, right, the ecology of it.
For decades, forest management might suppress every small fire, which allows tons of deadwood and dry brush to accumulate on the forest floor.
Building up fuel.
Exactly. And when a massive fire finally breaks out, it looks like an absolute apocalypse. It's terrifying. But ecologists know that certain ancient seeds in that forest can only germinate when exposed to the extreme, overwhelming heat of a massive fire.
Right, the fire isn't just destruction. It's the biological trigger for the next generation of growth.
I get that conceptually. But applied to human beings, why does God allow the system to burn to the ground? Why do we have to lose the river and suffer under the cruel Lord? Couldn't a rational person just look at their life, realize their priorities are out of alignment, and quietly fix it without needing a catastrophic forest fire in their personal life?
I mean, a purely rational person could, yes. But human beings are driven by ego, confirmation bias, and the sunk cost fallacy.
We really are our own worst enemies.
We are deeply emotionally invested in our own autonomy. As long as the river has even a trickle of water, we will convince ourselves that our current broken way of living is sustainable.
We'll just keep patching the sinking ship.
Exactly. We will exhaust every false idol, every staggering expert, and every quick fix before we will ever admit that our foundation is fundamentally flawed.
Wow.
So the smiting isn't God being a cruel taskmaster. It is the natural consequence of our own stubbornness.
He lets the natural consequences play out.
God allows the systems we idolize to collapse completely because it is the only way to strip away our illusions of control. It forces the humility required to finally stop trying to fix the old system and instead cry out for a new one.
Which brings us to the payoff of this entire cycle. And honestly, the restoration described at the end of Isaiah 19 is one of the most intellectually and geopolitically shocking passages in ancient literature.
It really is stunning.
We move past the smiting. The idols are gone. The false systems are dismantled. And the text says that in that day, 5 cities in the land of Egypt will speak the language of Canaan, which is the language of Israel, and they will swear allegiance to the Lord.
They're completely culturally realigned.
Yes. An altar to God is built right in the center of Egypt, but the true climax is a few verses later. It says a highway will be built from Egypt to Assyria.
A highway.
The Assyrians will travel to Egypt, the Egyptians will go to Assyria, and they will worship together. And God pronounces a blessing on all of them, saying, and this is crazy, "Blessed be Egypt, my people, and Assyria, the work of my hands, and Israel, mine inheritance."
If we connect this to the bigger picture, to fully grasp the magnitude of that statement, we have to provide a bit of geopolitical context.
Please do.
Assyria was not just a neighboring country. They were the terrifying, brutal war machine of the ancient Near East. They were the apex predators. Egypt was the southern superpower. And Israel was the tiny, traumatized battleground caught right between them, constantly being invaded and oppressed by both sides.
They were historic mortal enemies.
Exactly. Saying that they're going to share a highway and worship together is the modern equivalent of waking up tomorrow and reading that the United States, Russia, and China have decided to permanently dissolve their militaries
Oh my.
and merge their central economies and share a single unified capital. It is conceptually impossible to the ancient mind.
Egypt, my people. It gives me chills just reading it. God is looking at the literal symbol of bondage, the empire that enslaved the Israelites for 400 years, and giving them the exact same title of endearment that he gives to Israel.
It's rattled.
And he calls Assyria the architects of terror, the work of my hands. This completely shatters our standard operating procedures for how we deal with conflict.
It really does.
When our relationships break down or our societies fracture, our instinct is to build a wall. We write off the other side as permanently irredeemable.
But this text argues that when systems completely collapse, the rubble can be used to build something that transcends the original division.
And this is where we extract the most profound insight regarding how we trust God when our own lives feel like they're falling apart, right?
Absolutely. When your personal rivers dry up, when a career collapses, or a deeply important relationship fractures, the natural human response is to feel abandoned by God.
Because all we see is the smoke.
Right. We look at the smiting and assume it is the end of the story. But understanding this blueprint changes your entire paradigm.
You start to see the fire differently.
Yes. You begin to recognize that the breakdown of your fragile, man-made systems is not evidence of God's absence. It is the active instrument of his realignment.
He is letting the dead wood burn so the new seeds can germinate.
Exactly. It strengthens your trust because you realize his ultimate goal is never merely destruction. It is radical, unthinkable unification.
Right. It completely reframes the purpose of the pain. If God can take the mortal enemies of the ancient world nations, defined by centuries of bloodshed, and build a superhighway of peace between them, then there is absolutely no personal fracture in your life that is beyond repair.
None.
No family division is too toxic, no corporate culture is too poisoned, and no societal collapse is too far gone, provided we are willing to let the false systems fail and allow him to reset the foundation.
Exactly. It challenges the finality of our divisions. We assume that because the bridge collapsed, the river can never be crossed again.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
But this cycle proves that the destruction of the old rotten bridge is exactly what makes room for a vastly superior infrastructure.
But that requires us to surrender our tight grip on the old way of doing things.
Right. Endure the humility of the fog and trust the architect of the new highway.
Let's do a quick flyover of the massive territory we've covered today. We started by looking at how the most catastrophic failures never start with external storms.
They start with the invisible rot.
Right, that internal division and polarization, which slowly chokes out the trust required to keep our systems running. Then we saw how the collapse of those systems plunges us into a fog of panic.
Where we eagerly hand over our agency to staggering, incompetent experts offering quick fixes.
Yeah, those princes of Zoan. And then we explored the painful but necessary paradox of smite and heal, how God allows our broken systems to burn to the ground to force the humility we refuse to choose ourselves.
Oh, painful mercy.
And finally, we landed on the breathtaking reality of radical restoration, where former enemies are bound together on a unified foundation.
And I want to leave you with one final thought regarding that highway.
Okay, what is it?
Notice the specific nature of the healing. When God restores Egypt, he doesn't just refill the Nile River, rebuild their economy, and let them go back to being a wealthy, isolated superpower.
Right, it wasn't just a reset button.
No. True healing is never just returning to the status quo. The pinnacle of the restoration is the highway. Rebuilding requires us to do more than just fix ourselves in a vacuum. It requires us to actively pave roads toward the people and places we were previously divided from. The ultimate proof that your foundation has been genuinely healed is your capacity to connect with your former enemy.
A brand new highway built straight over the rubble of a collapsed foundation.
Exactly.
It doesn't get more powerful than that. We've mapped out the ancient blueprint for how things break and how they are beautifully rebuilt. So the only thing left to ask is, how will you apply this information in your life?